So hello and welcome to another episode of TopTenz. I'm your host for this episode, Karl Small, reporting from, as I like to call it, the bedroom in my house. What else would I call it? And today we're talking about 10 horrifying cave tragedies from history. So has anybody out there seen The Descent, the movie where a bunch of ladies decide to, for fun, crawl around in a dank cave underground at night and then everything goes to hell when it turns out the cave is full of horrible monster people they subsequently have to beat to death with caving equipment? Well, I've seen that film a lot and I'm subsequently very scared of caves. And when I saw the opportunity to edit a script simply titled 10 Horrifying Caving Tragedies, I saw it as a prime opportunity to make everybody out there as scared of caves as I am. So let's get to it, shall we? Starting with number 10, the Mossdale disaster. So in The Descent, and I promise this is the last time I'll mention the film, a key plot point is that the monster-filled cave the ladies are exploring is unmapped, as it's seen as a pretty big deal for caving enthusiasts to figure out where a cave system goes and presumably whether or not it contains any monsters. Anyway, upon its discovery in 1941, the Mossdale Caverns in the UK quickly became a hotspot for men wishing to test their mettle and the limits of their caving prowess. Of particular interest to cavers, even to this day, is discovering what's called the linking section between the Mossdale cave system and another cave several miles away, with such a discovery being referred to quite simply as the Holy Grail for cavers. To be clear, we do know that these caves are connected, we just don't know how. Confused? Well, to explain, there's a stream running through the Mossdale Caverns, and at multiple points throughout history, people have poured dye into this stream to figure out where the water goes. And we do know where the water goes, to a small pool about a kilometre away, but it doesn't turn up until about 18 days later. This suggests there are vast, miles-deep sections of the cave that nobody has ever laid eyes on, and these are what seasoned cavers live for, which I guess is a poor turn of phrase, considering the subject matter, so let's get on to the disaster. In 1967, a group of 10 men headed into the caves hoping to find evidence of this connection, and after a couple of hours, 4 of them decided not to continue, a decision that would save their lives. You see, at around this time it began to rain, a not uncommon occurrence in Britain, and one that turned the caves into a literal death trap. Within hours, the entrance to the cave was wholly inaccessible due to flooding. Locals scrambled to dig a ditch in an attempt to divert the water, with some doing so with their bare hands. It was too little, too late. All 6 men left in the cave perished, and the act of recovering their bodies was deemed to be simply too dangerous, prompting the authorities to concrete over the entrance, entombing the men within. Many years later, though, the cave was reopened with the advent of modern equipment and caving knowledge. The bodies were able to be recovered. It was decided, though, that they should be buried within the cave that claimed their lives, this time, though, above the flood level. Number 9, the Pagancia base stabbing. So as we've just discussed, one of the many dangers you can encounter whilst traversing a cave is the fact that at a moment's notice, the whole thing can end up underwater, which sucks because there are few thoughts more harrowing than drowning underground in total darkness surrounded by billions upon billions of cave scorpions. A thing that totally exists, by the way. I've seen them, they suck, I hate them. For some, though, a cave being flooded is exactly why they'd want to explore it in the first place, as was the case of a Czech diver found in the underwater caves of Pagancia Bay in Croatia. Exactly what happened to the diver, identified in official documentation as simply MK, is unclear, as they made the baffling decision to explore the system alone. What we do know, though, is after their untimely demise, their body was found in the cave with a knife lodged firmly in their chest, a visual that wouldn't be out of place in later seasons of CSI, and initially led to authorities assuming MK had been murdered, because apparently caves aren't scary enough without the thought of them also being home to serial killers. However, as they examined the body, a far more concerning narrative began to form. The diver was critically low on oxygen when they died, and the cause of death was ruled to be a combination of both drowning and the stab wound, leading authorities to conclude that the death wasn't murder, but suicide, with MK seemingly deciding that stabbing themselves in the chest was a preferable alternative to drowning, the first and apparently only example we're aware of an underwater knife suicide in the world. Number 8. Floyd Collins. Perhaps the most famous story on this list, the tale of Floyd Collins is one that has captured and sparked the imagination of many a writer and many a plagiarist, as unlike a lot of the other people on this list who died alone or cut off from the world, Collins died in full view of it. To explain, while exploring Sand Cave in Kentucky in 1925, Collins accidentally dislodged a large rock which fell upon his leg. At the same time, a couple hundred pounds of gravel dislodged by the rock also fell over the rest of his body, effectively burying him beneath. But Collins wasn't dead and presumably felt reassured that at some point somebody would find and dig him out. He was, after all, less than 200 feet from the entrance to the cave when the accident occurred. Well, somebody did find Collins, but they couldn't figure out how to get him out. In fact, Nobody could, and they asked a lot of people. We're a veritable army of cavers, engineers, emergency personnel, and of course, rubberneckers and journalists descending on the scene to see what was going on. None of them had any idea how to free Collins, who remained in surprisingly good spirits, even as going as far to give an interview from beneath the large pile of rocks trapping him. However, after a few days it became abundantly clear there was no way to free Collins, and their only hope was to dig down through the earth and get him out that way, which they did, arriving just shy of a day late, with Collins being pronounced dead of exposure when the miners eventually reached him. He'd somehow held on for 17 days, the entire time a literal stone's throw away from the entrance, with hundreds of people desperately trying to help him. Moving on, number 7. Bushman's Hole accident. A common theme in a lot of horror and cosmic horror is the idea of a portal located in some remote, inaccessible region of the Earth that leads to an alternate dimension full of skeletons and evil, weird nonsense, that we shouldn't be messing with. Well, such a place does exist, and it's here on Earth. It's located in South Africa. Known as Bushman's Hole, or Bomanzagat to locals, the cave is accessible by what appears to be little more than a small puddle in the middle of a desolate primordial wasteland where nothing is said to grow. A puddle that, when leapt into, leads one to one of the deepest cave systems on Earth, which is filled with literal millions-year-old water. And yes, at least one skeleton, at least for a short period of time. As one of the remotest places on Earth, numerous divers have attempted to explore the system and reach the bottom, with the number of people who've accomplished the latter being a more exclusive club than men who've walked on the moon. In regards to Bushman's Hole, several people have lost their lives within it, most notably Dean Dreyer and Dave Shaw. Now, while these two men died a decade apart, Dreyer dying in 1994 and Shaw in 2005, their deaths are intrinsically linked, as it is Shaw who found Dreyer's body and then died trying to recover it. What makes this story particularly frightening, though, is that when Shaw found Dreyer's body, it had almost completely skeletonized, yet was still wearing perfectly preserved diving gear. And it should be noted that he found this while swimming around in absolute darkness. If that's not the start of a horror movie, I don't know what is. And for the curious, both men's bodies were eventually recovered and laid to rest. Number 6. The Plura Caves tragedy. Perhaps one of the scariest things about cave diving is just how quickly things can go wrong and how truly and utterly screwed you will be if they do, since nearly everything, including administering life-saving aid, is difficult to the point of near impossibility underwater. This was the case for the group of divers set out to explore the most challenging cave system in Norway, the Plura Caves. Despite the team being made up of 5 highly experienced Finnish divers accustomed to the sub-freezing temperatures of the water, one of whom was literally a rescue diver with the Finnish fire service, things still went wrong. Specifically, a short while into the dive, one of the divers is believed to have become entangled in their own equipment, a common thing that can happen with divers when you're moving around in the dark. They then panicked and drowned. This is all while the aforementioned highly experienced rescue diver tried to help them, by the way. But there was still more tragedy to come, because there was also a second dive going into the cave system that day, and when they came across the body, they were past the point of no return and had no choice but to push past and force their way through the 2 bodies in their way. Which probably has you thinking, didn't I say one person drowned? How were there 2 bodies? Well, it's believed that when the leader of that second group encountered the first body, they also panicked and drowned, meaning their group had to push past both bodies. As with the previous case, both bodies were eventually recovered and laid to rest. Number 5, the Cave Creek disaster. So after watching this, you're probably thinking, okay, going into caves is a no-go, but surely you can go look a cave or something, right? It's not like a cave is some vast slumbering beast that hungers for flesh. Well, you'd be forgiven for thinking that when looking at the details of the Cave Creek disaster. Taking place in 1995 and claiming the lives of 14 people, the disaster occurred when a viewing platform above Cave Creek in New Zealand collapsed, sending over a dozen people tumbling into the chasm below, 14 of whom died and 4 of whom survived, albeit with traumatizing, life-threatening injuries. Okay, so it's probably unfair to blame the cave on this one, as a later inquiry found that the accident was caused by an almost comical level of ineptitude on behalf of the Department of Conservation, who ordered the construction of the platform in the first place. And highlights from this inquiry include no engineers being involved with any process of the construction of this viewing platform, and the whole thing being held together with nails, as in regular nails. And the reasoning why it was held together with nails is because the person in charge of the construction forgot to bring a drill. So they couldn't put any bolts into the wall, so they decided to just nail it together instead. Understandably, the incident caused a massive overhaul of the systems and regulations in place across New Zealand in regards to the building of bridges and similar structures. Number 4, the Namtalu flooding. As we've already made abundantly clear, when exploring a cave, things can go very wrong very fast, and it'd be in your best interest to expect the unexpected whilst down there. But surely there are some things you can be reasonably sure won't happen underground, like say, a tidal wave? You'd be wrong. This exact scenario occurred in 2003 in the Nam Tlu caves in Thailand, with a freak weather event causing a flash flood, which is already dangerous. But now imagine you're underground, in the dark, and have no idea that hundreds of feet above you, thousands upon thousands of gallons of water are coursing through every nook and cranny in just the land, for miles around, being directed directly towards you. The only clue to anything at all being amiss being a deafening roar as a several foot high wave of water comes crashing towards you with the force of a moving car. This was the fate of 8 people that fateful day, with the only survivor being a British woman, Karl, who was thrown to safety by her fiancé, who perished in the disaster while attempting to swim for help. But Carol's ordeal did not end there, because she subsequently had to spend about 16 hours just waiting in the dark, the only noises being the slowly subsiding noise of the roar of the waves, and eventually the sound of rescuers. Understandably, she was traumatised by the event and rarely gives interviews about it. Number 3, the Neil Moss incident. As we've already discussed, not everyone who dies in a cave dies alone. Indeed, some of them die mere feet away from help that is unable to reach them for whatever reason. Modern-day Tantaluses stuck with salvation inched within their grasp. Such was the case for British student Oscar Neil Moss, who, while exploring the many unexplored passageways of Peak Cavern in 1959. Like with Floyd Collins, Moss became trapped when he moved a rock, though in this case he didn't trap himself beneath it, but the ladder he used to descend to the unexplored passageways he was investigating. This left Moss trapped at the bottom of a pencil-thin crevasse, literally trapped between a rock and a hard place. All attempts to rescue Moss failed, a rope thrown to him snapped, the ladder became even more stuck when they tried to pull it out, and even if it didn't, Moss couldn't bend his elbows to reach it. He was literally stuck in. What's worse is that the whole time the cave was filling with carbon dioxide, forcing rescuers to repeatedly leave the cave to recover, all while Moss became ever more distressed and delirious as his supplies of oxygen ran critically low. With time running short, rescuers decided on one last Hail Mary in the form of an 18-year-old girl, June Bailey. Standing a hair short of 5 feet tall and weighing 100 pounds wet through, Bailey was an experienced potholer and was given permission to do whatever was necessary to free Moss. This included being given equipment to chisel him out, or if that failed, break his collarbones to make him more, and there's no real nice way to put this, pliable, so they could move him through the crevasse, because anything's better than dying down there. This was ultimately unnecessary, as by the time she was ready, Moss had already died. That section of the system is now known as Moss's Chamber, in his honour. Number 2, the Stokefontein Cave disaster. One thing that's probably become quite clear throughout this video is that while underground, in particularly underground and underwater, even the most experienced and hardened potholers, divers and caving aficionados can and do panic when things go wrong, which is what makes the story of Peter the Hustle so tragic. We say this because while exploring the aforementioned caving system in South Africa, the Hustle became separated from his group when he inexplicably decided to leave the guideline connecting him to the rest of his dive mates to explore a random passageway in the system. Whether the Hustle willingly detached himself from the line or it snapped when he was pulled taut against the jagged rocks of the caves is unclear, but once he was cut off, he was as good as dead. Over the next several weeks, divers attempted to locate the Hustle to no avail, sometimes passing within feet of where his body would ultimately be found. But here's the part that's going to kick your feelings in the nuts. When the Hustle's body was found on a small island within the cave system, it was found next to a message hastily scrawled into the sand by a firm but shaky hand. I love you, Shirl and Ma. It would later emerge that the Hustle had used the last of his strength to write a final message to his wife and mother before succumbing to the effects of starvation. And finally, number 1, the Nutty Putty Cave tragedy. First of all, yes, we know this cave has a silly name, but it was like this close to having a literally far sillier name, with the first idea for a name for it being the Silly Putty Cave, supposedly due to the uniquely clay-lined pastures found throughout, which cause explorers to leave behind random fingerprints and equipment indentations while exploring it. Now, unlike a lot of cave systems covered so far, the Nutty Putty Cave system wasn't considered to be all that challenging. I mean, it was still considered to be dangerous because it's a massive hole in the ground, like, full of spiders and stuff, but the fact it was literally covered with soft, smooth clay rather than jagged rocks made it a popular tourist spot and a place for Boy Scouts to explore. Something that resulted in people not taking the cave as seriously as they perhaps should have, with guys trying to instill a sense of respect in visitors by giving the tightest passageways within the system ominous sounding names like the Scout Eater, the Birth Canal, with one particularly tight opening being called the Helmet Eater. Yes, I know how that sounds. You go through the Birth Canal into the Helmet Eater. It's funny, let's move on. My name's Smallwood and I'm saying these things, I get it. Let's move on. So, still, people continue to explore the caves in abundance, smoothing out many of the passageways to the point that becoming stuck in the birth canal was apparently a frequent occurrence. This is what spelled the end of one John Jones, who, while exploring the system in 2009, attempted to push himself headfirst through the birth canal. Now, we checked, and according to every expert on the subject, this is a very stupid idea, and seasoned potholders have a pretty basic rule of thumb. Do not push yourself through an opening that leads downwards head first for the exact reason Jones would ultimately perish. Jones became stuck, hanging upside down, and spent an agonising 27 hours there, panicking as the blood rushed to his head, and rescuers tried in vain to free him, with one later concluding that had Jones become stuck by putting his feet through the gap first, he, in all likelihood, would have survived. Instead, he died stuck, his top half cut off from the rest of the world, his last experience likely being the sound of the help he assumed would be freeing him, drifting off into the distance as he lost consciousness. Nutty Putty Cave would eventually become Jones's tomb, the entrance sealed off after rescuers deemed recovering his body to be an impossible task. And I hope everybody out there found this video to be, I'm not going to say entertaining, but informative. I certainly found the script while I was editing it to be that, so if you did find this video to be informative in that way, leave a like, a comment with feedback and suggestions, and subscribe for more content like this. I've been your host, Karl Smallwood. I am still scared of caves and being underwater in a cave, and yeah, go out there and have the day that you deserve. And for anyone out there who still wants to go into a cave, just be sure to bring along an extra bag for carrying your steel-lined balls. Cheers.